and I'll just do introductions around the table. We have Counselor at Large Michael Green, myself, Latoya Allen, 4th District Counselor, Counselor Rudd, Counselor Bay, President Hudson, Counselor Thompson, and Counselor Driscoll. And so what I'll do, Caitlin, I'll just have you introduce yourself and your role with the Land Bank and give us your overview, and then after we'll open it up for questions.
Sounds good. Thank you for having us. I'm Caitlin Wright. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Syracuse Land Bank, and I'm joined by Vito Shosholi, who's the Chairman of our board. We also have a couple members of our Citizens Advisory Board here in the audience, and Pat Hogan, who's going to be on our board soon, we think. I'm going to give a brief presentation, just if you want to advance to the next slide. So the Land Bank was created in 2012 to address problems of blighted and abandoned properties. Everybody here is already well aware of the problems that those cause. You know, blighted properties like this, like you're seeing here in the slide, and this kind of illegal dumping really depress surrounding property values, make it hard for nearby homeowners to grow any home equity, discourage them from investing in their properties, and they create a downward cycle of disinvestment. And so that's why in 2012 the city and county created the Land Bank to proactively address this problem, but we're one of many tools that are available to local government to deal with these problem properties. Since the Land Bank was established, we've partnered with the city to help make them a much better collector of delinquent taxes. From what I understand from NBD, the city's up over $14 million above historic collection levels.
Can you hold on one second, Caitlin?
It's an authority, it's not everybody.
Right. Mary, where could we find it set in the
I think
book?
we've always been a special object of expense.
Okay.
Are they just looking for where in the budget it is?
Statement was that the land bank's financials are not included in the city's book of
I know
financials.
that, but we need to look at something to approve something.
Special objects of expense?
Right.
Right, where's the rest of the budget for the land bank, not just the $750 that you give them?
The Land Bank's budget, I'm sorry, is not in your packet. That's, I'll make it available to you. I shared a copy with Councilor Rudd last week, and I'll email it out to all of the councilors as well. It's also posted on our website.
Okay, that was the confusion. We were looking in the book for something.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with the formatting here on this slide, but in addition, since, also helping the city collect delinquent taxes, our primary goal is to return vacant and abandoned properties to productive use. And so since we've been established, we've sold 691 properties, returning them to the tax rolls. Those generate about $1.2 million a year in local property taxes. Because we sell them as fixer-uppers, they've leveraged about $22 million in private investment in renovations and over $11 million in other grant investments in renovations. The Land Bank has demolished 279 blighted properties to date, although we have a long ways to go in that regard. And we've been awarded $9 million in grant funds from the New York Attorney General's office. That's more than any other land bank in the state. And we think it's largely because the city is proactively foreclosing on delinquent properties that puts us in a position where we have site control of a lot of shovel-ready projects. And I think that's why we've been able to secure more grant funding than any other land bank. We have a couple of before and afters to share here with you that Luke will just scroll through. But what we really want to talk about today, what we really want to talk about today is some of our goals for the coming fiscal year. This is the third time in 3 months that we've been in front of the Common Council, so we've gotten a lot of feedback from the councilors of late. And I just want to report back that we hear you loud and clear, and I understand there are a lot of concerns about things the Land Bank can be doing better, and we're committed to working on those things and improving on a variety of different fronts. The first area being a plan for infill and focused redevelopment. We hear you loud and clear that we want to see more new construction and more rehabs in our neighborhoods. NBD is currently working on a plan that's targeting the optimum blocks for this kind of focused investment, and we will overlay those blocks with our current inventory to find where we have specific sites, specific parcels that are good opportunities for infill development and for subsidized rehab. And we'll flag those properties as infill opportunities, not to be sold as side lots. And then the next step, of course, is to work with NBD and others to attract developers with the financial capacity to build out these plans. And so another piece of that would be to look at purchasing certain strategic properties. Most of the properties that come into the land bank come through tax foreclosure, but sometimes that gives us kind of a checkerboard with gaps in the middle, and occasionally that means we need to go out and purchase one to put together a bigger assembly to attract new development. So all of this will be part of a plan or a strategy to develop a plan to attract this infill development that everybody wants. All right. We're already issuing RFPs for some of our more high-profile properties, trying to engage the counselors and community members in drafting those RFPs, and then once the proposals come in vetting the proposals and selecting preferred developers. We're trying to get a whole bunch of these out right now because of the CFA timeline, so I think we have 4 more that we want to release in the coming weeks. That will enable us to work with the community to select preferred developers and give those people an option to purchase so that they'll have site control needed to go apply for CFA funding. We're also going to work with the Citizens Advisory Board and the real estate community to figure out some strategies for how we can attract new buyers and a wider pool of buyers than we're already attracting. And it's our goal to increase sales volume by 50% in the coming year. We're also hearing a lot from the community that people feel like it's too hard to buy a land bank property. I think we need to get some more detailed feedback and information on that front, so we will be polling community members and potential buyers to find out exactly what is it about our process that is presenting a barrier, define what those barriers are, and then work with our Citizens Advisory Board and our Board of Directors to figure out how can we reduce those barriers and make it easier for people to buy land bank properties. We'll be working on that process over the next 3 months. And then a suggestion that came at the last council meeting from Councilors Green and Rudd is to give people more access to information about our inventory. Right now, if you go to the website of our active listings, you'll only see 50 or 60 active listings, but we have a lot more properties than that that could be potentially listed and sold. So we're working on posting an interactive map that will allow people to click on a property and see, is this already listed with specs and an asking price, or is it one that could be listed, or maybe it's already under contract and not available, but it should give viewers much more access to information about the properties that are in the land bank inventory. And then we're also hearing feedback about the way we maintain our properties. We have about 1,000 properties in our inventory right now, and as you can imagine, keeping up with lawn mowing and debris removal is a daunting task. Right now, we do periodic inspections once a month to identify issues and address them immediately. And we're in the middle of our spring cleanups right now, where every single property in our inventory is visited, debris is removed from the front and backyard, we're cutting back overgrowth and making it a clear path so that our lawn mowing crews will be able to get in and access those sites properly. Last year we spent about $115,000 on spring cleanups. Hopefully this year will be a little bit less arduous, but we've already taken away 14 pallets of TVs that have been dumped on land bank properties. Last year we did about 28 pallets of TVs total and 1,200 tires. So just to give you an idea of the scale of the spring cleanup operation that's currently underway. But we think we can do even better in the coming year when it comes to debris removal and property maintenance. We've been having conversations with the county's Higher Ground initiative, and they're going to be helping us out with litter pickup, specifically focused on major corridors where people really see these properties every day, so that they're addressed more frequently than just once a month. And we have some properties where illegal dumping is a repeat problem. We've been working with the police department for years on this issue, but we're going to get more aggressive about trying to crack down on this problem. And we're launching an initiative where we're going to be putting up 5 or 6 additional deer cameras on these sites where there is repeat dumping to try to capture license plate numbers and really stem this activity. After we sell a property, it's no longer a land bank property, but I'm also concerned about the way those homes look as well. We want people that buy these homes to make a significant investment so that it inspires the neighbors to rehab their homes as well and maybe paint their house and really improve the block. So we're trying to put a more positive spin on this rather than just using our enforcement mechanism and our punitive tools. We want people to compete for the best before and after photo. So we're going to be launching an initiative where each quarter, as we're closing out enforcement mortgages, people can submit their before and after photos and compete for a prize for the best before and after from that quarter. And that's going to be focused on exterior improvements. So big picture, we know that there's a lot of room for us to improve, and we're launching a variety of different initiatives in the coming year to do so, largely based on the feedback we've gotten from the counselors over the past couple of months. But I do want to stress that all of these things are going to require us to increase capacity, whether it's through consultants or through added part-time staff. It just takes more manpower to get these things done, and we really rely on the financial support that we get from the city. And I would say that, continuing that financial support is going to be critical to enabling us to increase our capacity in these ways.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. And I'll start with Council Green, and we'll just go down. Okay. I do have a question on you said your active listings. So when are you guys going to roll it out as far as the new part that you have, the mapping?
We've been having a bit of a website glitch for the past month, but I did get an email this morning that the glitch should be fixed. So I would hope within the next 2 weeks we'll have that launched.
And so this is now you'll be able to look at any property that you guys have.
Yeah, so right now we do have a PDF list of all of our properties listed so that information is available to the public. What this will change is that it'll put it in a mapped format so that somebody can drill down on their area and see all the dots, and they'll be color coded as to whether it's a vacant lot or a demolition candidate or a rehab candidate, and then they can click and get more information about that property.
Okay, and so for the people that aren't going to your website, the ones that are just driving around, they see a house, are you guys going to have the for sale signs on there?
Well, that won't necessarily change. So right now, all of our buildings have land bank signs on them that are no trespassing signs. And then once a home is actively listed, it has a for sale sign in addition. So we are going to try to increase the number of listings that we have, but that won't necessarily mean that every single building will have a for sale sign on it.
Okay, and then I've gotten a few complaints where people are interested in purchasing property, but then when they call the land bank, they're telling them that it's not available. So why is that happening, and how can you guys stop doing it so that way we can sell the properties?
Before we list a property, we get all the trash and debris cleaned out. Our construction staff drafts a scope of work so that we have an idea of how much it's going to cost to rehab. Rehabs range between, some are only $10,000 of work, some need $80,000 worth of work. So we try to come up with an estimate of how much work it needs. And then our sales staff uses that information to determine what the listing price is. So the problem is that people are calling about homes where those steps haven't been taken yet. We do want to work on increasing the number of active listings so that fewer people will be getting that response. But there's still going to be homes where those questions haven't been answered yet. And what happens when people call about those homes is that it prompts us to direct that information to our sales staff, and those houses get listed sooner rather than later. So we're going to work on increasing that volume so that that's a less frequent problem.
Okay, and for your demos for this year, how many do you project?
For this calendar year, we have funding from the Attorney General that should cover 56 demolitions. Occasionally, a buyer will approach us and say they want to buy the lot next door and that they're going to pay for the demolitions. So, that's infrequent, but so that might bring us to a total of around 60 for this year. We do not have any funds committed right now for 2020. We think of the calendar year as opposed to your fiscal year. Sorry, I know that is confusing. We don't have any funds committed for 2020, but we're in the middle of a grant cycle right now with AG funding where if we complete all of our deliverables in 2019, we can go back to them and ask for some additional money for 2020. We don't know how much additional funding they might make available, but we're on track to complete all those deliverables so that we can make that ask.
Okay, and besides selling the vacant lots for side lots to other homeowners, do you have a plan for the vacant lots, and have you been in contact with carryover at home headquarters to see if there's ways for you to actually build on these lots?
Yeah, so some lots seem like they're a logical candidate for side lots, but a lot of lots are great candidates for infill construction. So where we have maybe 4 in a row, we view that as a great infill opportunity, and we do reach out to home headquarters and ask if it's a place where they may be willing and able to build in the future. And they're not the only ones. There's other developers in town that do new construction. So like I said in my presentation here, NBD's working on mapping the sites or the blocks throughout the city that present the best opportunity for that kind of infill investment. And what we're going to do is take those blocks that they're going to map and overlay it with our existing inventory of properties and flag the vacant lots and the demolition candidates that seem to be in those areas of opportunity and flag them as infill candidates so that they don't get sold as side lots. We'd like to have an inventory of 200 or more building sites that are ready to go so that when people get grant opportunities, we have shovel-ready sites for them that will make sense for infill.
Okay, and last question, do you guys have a plan for the block on Midland between Beard and Colvin?
Our plan is that we want to see infill construction there. Now it's a matter of enticing a developer who can come do that, who has the financing. And we're constantly trying to do so. Whenever I get phone calls from developers that are interested in building, I have a list of about a dozen sites that I suggest to people, and that is very near the top of the list where we want to see infill happen.
Okay, can you just keep me posted on that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Latoya,
Cons-
Counselor, before you move on, Caitlin, if you can, would you present to the council what you presented to me last night so that they have any questions?
Sure. So we've been advocating for years now for a recurring source of funding for the land bank that we could count on year over year and plan out into the future on, as opposed to one budget year at a time. Whether that source of funds comes from the state or from local government has always been kind of up in the air. We asked the county last year if they would consider passing home rule legislation to add a local real estate transfer tax. And I think that they're interested in doing so. If they were to pass that law, instituting a local real estate transfer tax, it would have to be approved by the state as well. So there have been some conversations between our county elected officials and our state elected officials about whether or not everybody could draft a bill that they agree on and get it passed this year. There's only 8 weeks left of session at the state level, so if we're going to achieve it this year, we'd all really have to hustle. But I think that there is consensus on what that bill should look like, and it would dedicate about $1.5 million a year to the land bank. That would sunset after a period of time. I don't think they've agreed on an exact period of time, but somewhere between 5 and 8 years of support would be committed at that $1.5 million level. But I think there's some concern about 1.5 not really being enough annually. That would allow us to bridge our operating deficit and do what we're doing right now. And it sounds to me like people aren't super satisfied with just the status quo of exactly the way the land bank is operating today. I'm hearing a lot of feedback of people wanting us to do more work than that, which would require some funding in addition to that $1.5 million. So they would really like to see a commitment from the city that if they're able to secure this funding, that the city would also continue to financially support the land bank for that same length of time, somewhere between 5 and 8 years.
When you say they, who is they?
The county and the state.
County and the state, but who? Where is this coming from?
So the county legislature would have to vote on this ordinance, the real estate transfer tax, and then it would have to be signed by the county executive, Ryan McMahon, and then it would have to go to the Assembly and the Senate with sponsors. We've been having conversations with Assemblyman Magnarelli about sponsoring this on the Assembly side, and I've been kind of waiting to see if it's really gelling, and then I'm going to reach out to Senator May and ask her if she would be willing to support it on the Senate side, although I haven't made that ask yet. Oh, you have. Good.
Okay.
So, Caitlin, this is real estate transfer.
It's an existing tax, by the way.
It's an I had heard mortgage recording. They were talking about at one time. So explain to me.
Yeah.
I understand the mortgage recording. I don't understand what this is.
So right now, New York State charges $4 per thousand real estate transfer tax whenever you sell a piece of real estate. So it's $4 per thousand of the sales price that the seller pays, and that's a
Seller pays, right?
Yep. And that's a state tax. Some local municipalities have added a local tax on top of that. So like Erie County charges an extra $5 per thousand that goes to their county road fund. Onondaga County has never instituted a local tax on top of the state tax, and the city of Syracuse has not either.
So if this tax, if we were successful in this, what you're stating is a county-wide effort to include the county and the city,
Correct.
of which it's a state tax. Would it end up being a state or a county?
It would be a local county tax, but it's home rule legislation, so it has to be approved by the state as well.
We get the difference.
You get the difference.
We're asking for an increase of the real estate transfer tax. That amount of money, at the current discussions, there are multiple uses. We are one of them.
And what would we get? What percentage of that if they raised it?
Well, it would be about $1.5 million a year. So the proposal on the table, there's a state charge of $4 per thousand. There's a proposal on the table to add a county charge of $3 per thousand. One of those $3 would go to the land bank, and that would generate about $1.5 million a year in revenue.
Councilor Rudd, you got questions?
Maybe it's our fancy Barracuda software that spams things out, but I don't have the budget that, if you emailed it, I don't have it looking in my email. I have other communications.
Sorry,
but
I
not
didn't.
that.
I gave it to you in hard copy, but
You
I'll
gave me a
email
hard
it as
copy.
well.
Okay.
I'll email it to all of the councilors right after this meeting.
My fault.
That's it?
I just
I'll
wanted to,
reserve for later. Maybe I come back.
I just want to follow up. Mary, does that have any impact on, if that were to occur, does that have an impact on anything that the budget-wise? That's not,
It would not be part of the city's budget.
it's not, that's my question. It's not part of the city budget, so it's just additional tax funding that you would receive.
Correct.
Okay. So it wouldn't have anything about moving the cap, or
No.
county would make the payment back directly to them? Directly?
Correct.
So it would bypass the city altogether.
Unless the money is coming from some phantom place, somebody is affected by it. Let's be careful to imply that somebody's not spending the money, or that the money will not go somewhere that it was intended to go. Let's be clear.
That's in part of, it's gotta be part of the law, and I agree with you.
Yeah, let's stop the
Absolutely
phantom.
be sure that's tied up. Part of the drafted legislation that we have been discussing.
Okay, Councilor Bay, you have any questions?
No.
Hudson?
No.
Thompson?
Steve?
Yeah, no, I'm taking, no.
No?
So, to follow up with what Councilor Allen was saying, you take, the city sells you the house, you have it, before you do the assessment and everything, it's considered not listed, is that it?
Right, until we get in there and clean it out and determine the listing price and,
So how many of those are you holding a bay, say?
well, at our annual report, we had a pie graph showing that there's, how many have been sold, et cetera, and there's about 191 renovation candidates that are not actively listed for sale right now. We've been able to support a capacity of listing 50 or 60 properties at a time, and we sell about a dozen each month. So it's not as if those 191 are sitting there for years. They're constantly cycling through into the active listing category as we have closings.
What's the amount of time between acquisition and listing?
It varies widely. So it depends on the condition of the building. We list the ones that are in the best condition first.
What's the average?
I would have to look that up for you.
And I guess on the budget end, what the question would be is, how was the city money spent last year, right?
Last year, the city restricted the $750,000 in two ways. $500,000 was restricted for blight removal, and there was a requirement that we match it dollar for dollar. So between July 1 and December 31st, we spent the city's $500,000 on blight removal, and now between January 1 and June 30th, we're spending the match from the AG's office so that we'll meet that contract requirement. It also required that we demolish at least 45 houses, and we're on track to achieve both of those goals that are required in the funding contract. The remaining $250,000 was limited to property maintenance expenses, and that's, we spend a lot more than that on lawn mowing and debris removal, so we're spending that down accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Let me finish with them and then. Councilor Driscoll?
Yeah, I guess I often think about some conversations I've had with people about, in the past we did a lot of auction type stuff. Have you guys ever thought about, now that you kind of have the means to have clawback on, I know we did like kind of the dollar sales of houses, and then people didn't put in the money that they said they were going to put in to rehab them. That was kind of became a chronic problem. But I was just curious if there's any way we could use market forces to subsidize some of the work you're doing.
Well, in a sense, we kind of are. So as we're selling fixer-uppers, we sell a house for $10,000, and then we expect the buyer to fully renovate it within a year. They're making usually like a $60,000 or more investment in the renovations. So that's how we view ourselves, as leveraging private investment. And these houses are listed for sale. So there is competition. Occasionally we have multiple bidders, and the house oftentimes ends up going to the highest bidder. So in those ways, market forces are really a key part of what we do. We have seen some other land banks use auctions. We've been hesitant to do that because auctions had such a negative reputation in our community, but the Detroit Land Bank does online auctions. Each day, I think they put up somewhere between 2 and 5 houses. You put down a $500 deposit on your credit card to participate in the auction, and if you win, they're still going to vet you afterwards to make sure that you're not a bad actor with code violations or tax delinquencies or anything like that, and you're still required by contract to finish your renovations within a set period of time. What they find is happening is about half of those people that win the auction never actually close because they can't ultimately pass those minimum screening criteria, or they're not able to secure the financing that's needed for the renovations. So it is a way to generate a lot of excitement, and I think it does help them increase their sales prices, but you have about a 50% success rate on closing on the sale.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Rich
I
is
was
part of the
just
reason why we haven't
exploring
done
it, Rich.
auctions.
I'm not advocating for it. Just having the conversation, buddy.
It's worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think there's been some experience with zombie homes doing auctions. I know, at least in our neighborhood, that there's been some experience with that. And it does generate excitement, enthusiasm about the project, and so it's interesting.
Yeah.
Are you done with your questions?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay,
go ahead.
Okay. So one of the first things you said was that you're targeting, and I think your word was optimum blocks for redevelopment. And optimum is a value term.
Right.
And I might have different values than someone else. And as we see in the conversations about redistricting and lots of other issues, how those values get prioritized has a huge impact on the decisions that are made. So could you discuss how you determine optimum and in what group of inclusive or not group of folks whose views are being considered in that determination?
Well, it's very early on in the process at this point, but really neighborhood and business development has been analyzing all the blocks throughout the city, and so you're right, you have to write an algorithm to pick the optimum blocks and decide what's important to you, and that's what shapes the algorithm. I think it would make sense to include some community members in that conversation. Yeah, this is all kind of a nebulous idea at this point, so those are important things to consider when this planning process is playing out. Who's at the table deciding what goes into the algorithm?
So is that to say that at this point, community members, there's no advisory board, there's no group of, you might consider affected folks who are in that decision-making process?
Not yet at this point, but this is something that we'll definitely vet with our Citizens Advisory Board, and that we want them to be a part of before any decisions get made.
Okay. I think that would get a lot of us, excited to have that process be more inclusive.
I mean, Councilor Rudd was suggesting next week the idea of building off of existing assets, and maybe proximity to parks is one of the pieces that goes into that algorithm, or proximity to existing investments that the city's already made, things like that. Proximity to schools. I think all of that makes a lot of sense.
So I want to make sure I understand the mortgage transfer tax. I as a lawyer, I prepare those forms, so I'm a little bit familiar with that.
It's not a mortgage transfer.
Sorry, real estate transfer tax.
Yeah.
So $4 per thousand, $100,000 house, in addition, that would mean an additional $400?
The $400 is the existing state tax. That would not change. What's being proposed is adding a local tax on top of that of an extra $3.
Okay, so
So-
an additional $300.
Yeah, for somebody selling a $100,000 house, it would be an additional $300 tax for that person.
Okay.
And then the land bank would collect that $300?
No, the county clerk would collect that $300, and that would be a county tax, and only 1/3 of it would be dedicated to the land bank.
Okay.
So the land bank would get $100 of every $100,000 house.
Yeah.
Eventually trickle down. But for the average person selling a home, a $100,000 home, they would see their transfer taxes increase by $300. Okay.
And remember that the sales in the county, we get most of the money is spent in the
I
city.
see that. I see that that's a transfer of wealth from the county to the
Right.
city. I think it's worth acknowledging that that's what it would be. I mean, I know that there are land bank projects in the county, but obviously that's not the majority of the work that you're doing. What is the reserve that the land bank has right now in terms of cash reserve that you have? And can you tell me how that compares to the reserve that other land banks around the state have?
We have a reserve of approximately $3 million right now, and we're projecting if we continue deficit spending at the rate we are, that we would totally deplete that reserve by the first quarter of 2021. Most other land banks around the state do not have that level of a financial reserve, and it's because they have a much smaller operation. So we have tried to amass enough to operate for a one-year period without any additional funding if necessary as a rainy day fund. We're a little bit over that right now, but by the end of the year, we'll be under that target level.
Important, a couple of highlights on the financials. Our fund balance or net worth has actually decreased by over $1 million because of operating losses we're presently incurring. We have some very significant pressures on expenses that the board is very concerned with, not the least of which is the management of vacant land, but also the cleanup costs that are associated with, which are over $500,000 a year just to take care of debris that's being not only thrown but also inherited by us when we acquire the properties. So as a consequence, these are major, and demolition costs at $25,000 a house vastly exceeds our ability to address this issue in a timely fashion.
I understand. Again, I don't have your budget in front of me, so I can't actually
Yeah,
look at the
it's-
numbers that you're talking about, but I appreciate that you're doing a lot of work. I'm just trying to compare the work of the land bank here with what's happening in other places.
You know,
and why
without-
that is-
without seeing-
Finish my question, please.
Yeah, what-
The rest of the question is, the reserve you're saying is larger than that of other counties because the scope of the operation is bigger. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a big
It's very
reason-
simple. We've been far more aggressive land bank than many other land banks in the state. Far more, and the way we financed initially with significant revenue from the state of New York, plus the number of grants that we've been able to successfully receive from the Attorney General's office, when you combine, and some funding from the County of Onondaga, vastly exceeds most of the operations in the other approved land banks in the state of New York. So we start at a higher rate, and we do more, quite frankly, without parallel. I mean, there is no one who really approaches the activity level of the Syracuse Land Bank, to my knowledge.
There's two key
Maybe,
reasons.
but, yeah, go ahead. You want to talk about the reason?
Yeah, I think there's two key reasons why we scaled up larger than most other land banks. In most other communities, they were already doing a tax auction countywide, and people that were going to pay were paying to avoid the auction, and people that weren't going to pay are the ones that get foreclosed on. And so they could take those foreclosed properties and put them into their land bank, but they didn't have a way to really fund the maintenance and redevelopment of those properties. We had a kind of unique and weird opportunity here that we hadn't been auctioning properties, so we had this big backlog of seizable stuff, a lot of which we thought, if we just get more aggressive about collections, they're going to pay. And so there was an opportunity to really increase the city's collections and use some of that increased revenue to fund the land bank. And it was that opportunity to capture a delta that meant we could scale up. And a lot of other communities couldn't capture that delta. And we also didn't want to just duplicate what Home Headquarters and Housing Visions and other groups were already doing, focusing on one block at a time. We had a big problem, 1,800 vacant buildings and like 3,000 vacant lots when the land bank first started. And we said, we want to go after the scale of that problem and do the site assembly that's necessary so that we can bank these properties and make them available for groups like Home Headquarters and Housing Visions and other developers. And not to mention, the bulk of what we do is capturing interest and demand from private investors. But we didn't want to duplicate what those other groups were already doing. Other communities didn't already have a Home Headquarters, so they were perfectly content to take their land bank and focus on 1 or 2 blocks at a time, use AG money to renovate and flip those houses, and create an entity like a Home Headquarters. But we already had that, so we were looking to fill a different need.
That's helpful, thank you. And my last question is, the projected sunset of the real estate transfer tax being 5 to 8 years, does that match the projected sunset of the land bank period? Or is there some, not necessarily?
There's no sunset for the land bank legislation.
Well, I understand there's not
Yeah.
actually a sunset,
Yeah.
but I'm asking for your speculation of when you think the land bank will be done with its
Good
work.
question.
I would have to do a little bit more analysis to really give you a definitive answer. When we first got started, we thought that we'd catch up with the whole backlog of foreclosures in 3 years, and at that point, we'd hit peak inventory because we'd have more coming in than going out until the city was done with the backlog, and then we'd have more going out than coming in, and our inventory would shrink. Well, here we are 6 or 7 years in, and we still haven't really hit peak inventory yet, so we would have to do a little bit of an analysis with the city of when will we hit that peak inventory point. But we're working aggressively, like I said earlier, to increase our number of listings and to increase our sales volume by year. So we want to shrink our inventory faster than we have been to date, so we can get to that point where we're a much smaller organization. To Vito's point, I don't think that the land bank will ever not exist. Even if we really right-size the available amount of housing stock in the city and dispose of the vast majority of what the land bank currently owns, there's still going to be some number of foreclosures each year. And I think that it still makes sense to use the land bank to flip those properties, to
there's-
sell them, and have our enforcement mortgage in place.
If demand for housing in our community radically increased by some means, immigration, whatever, if it had increased, that market will change radically, and we'll have less of this issue of people walking away from properties. But the demand could influence how long, shorten the time frame that we need to stay in operation. If it weakens, then we're going to be in operation for a long time.
I think we will need to plan all of our operations to match up with that sunset.
Right.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, at some point we should be a much smaller organization.
That's the goal.
Well, the goal is for the elimination of it eventually. So that's something that
That's
you
the
and
goal.
Stephanie's office should definitely make sure that you're communicating like an end goal.
Yeah.
Because this isn't supposed to be an ongoing thing. All right. So any other questions?
Maybe it's more of a comment, which we also had when we talked in private, but over the last couple of years, I've bought a couple houses next to my house that most people think I was crazy for buying and didn't see the potential. And you basically have a portfolio of a whole bunch of that stuff.
Yep.
So more and more people are, oh wow, like this is really looking good. And other people kind of like jump in and invest while I'm investing. And I've always, in the past, in these hearings where you talk about, I mean, we can't do block by block, we need a whole system. I've always felt that looking at the whole city is overwhelming. So the scale of the vacancy problem is totally overwhelming, and it's only block by block, or like maybe a series of blocks where the change is actually possible. And I always thought in the past your assets were scattered, so it made it challenging for you, but now you have so many assets that I think you do have clusters. So, and I know you've said, but that's where the market's the worst, but I think you are the biggest market actor. So at this point, you have to have micro plans for your clusters to turn them over to whether it's like radical developers. I don't think you should be the developer. I think like you have to cluster things.
Okay.
I just don't think you'll do. I think like that's what developers are for.
Yeah.
And that's not your role. The moment you guys are trying to develop and make money on all these things is the moment nobody trusts you, because everybody thinks you're taking the best things.
That's a pretty valid point.
So I think you have to have relationships with. You have to package the properties in a way that you can turn them over more quickly. And I think it requires an analysis of where your clusters are. And then the thing I said about the park on my block, I said it's like asset-based community development. So the asset on my street is Elmwood Park. But it may be McKinley Park is an asset in one cluster. It may be that access to like a walkable business district with a library and a co-op or something are the assets in another cluster. So I just feel there has to be, I've always heard people ask for the plans, but we need like micro plans so that you can really flip, like these 25 are getting flipped, or within this 25 package, we're gonna demo 3, and we're like, there needs to be some kind of package deal to developers, and yeah, give them all to them for $1 a piece if that's what they need to make it happen, but we have to turn them over. And I think the only way to do it is to shrink, to have smaller plans. And then earlier you also mentioned the algorithm thing. And like, I'm like, no algorithms, nothing. Like, it takes somebody who knows the neighborhood and is like familiar with the assets and who can like see the vision, is willing to take a chance and honestly like disrupt the algorithm. Like, I think the algorithm says we're gonna have infinite number of land bank properties and our value is gonna become less and less. Like, we need to disrupt the model and the momentum to get a different path. So like, to the extent you build an algorithm, we will be held hostage by it. Like, we need people who see a different possibility. And like, I don't know, the land bank needs relationships with those people.
I think maybe what I said earlier was misunderstood. So we created an organization at this scale because that was the scale of abandoned and tax delinquent properties that we had. So if they're not paying when they're on the tax rolls, it makes sense to move them off the rolls and then market them to private investors that are willing to buy them and put them back on. So that was kind of the scale that we wanted to address. This is the scale of the problem. And we do need targeted strategies at a much more focused level when it comes to disposition. And that's why we're talking with NBD about finding these blocks or clusters of blocks that are optimum for redevelopment. However that gets defined, however they get selected, whether it's people doing drive-by surveys and polling people in the neighborhood who have that knowledge, whatever mechanism we use, we need to figure out where those focus areas are and then really work on targeted investment in those areas like I think you're talking about.
Maybe algorithm was too precise or mathematical.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, because Stephanie, do you want to speak to that? Because I think in some of the conversations we've had, you've had factors like the rest of the block is stable and there's a corner unit that is vacant that factors into your algorithm. So to say algorithm, I think, might be presenting someone with a mathematical statistic of the price of the house and blah, blah, but a lot of your algorithm is based on human factors, correct?
Yeah, and
Do you want to speak to
I'm up next, and I have
Right.
the Infill on here. I'm happy to speak now, or
Okay, we can deal with it later. I just wanted to,
Yeah.
just wanted
It's
to
just,
know what those criteria.
You can present it when you come up.
Yeah.
yeah, that's.
So, big picture, we hear that people want to see more active listings and the land bank doing more planning for these targeted investments. And we agree we want to do all those things, but it's going to take some added staff capacity, and we need financial resources to be able to deliver this higher level of service, which we would like to deliver a higher level of service to the community.
Okay, any other questions?
One last question. When you vet a buyer for, say, a two-family home, do you require that, or do we require that the taxes are paid on any properties that they have
Oh,
out?
absolutely. That's criteria number one. They can't have any tax delinquencies or code violations on their existing properties.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That will conclude that. And we're a little behind time, so we're gonna have Commissioner go ahead and get started. This is the budget hearing for neighborhood and business development. We have Counselor at Large, Counselor Green. I'm Latoya Allen, 4th District Counselor. Counselor Rudd, Counselor Bay, President Hudson, Counselor Thompson, Counselor Driscoll, and Counselor Lovejoy Grinnell.
Is it?
All right. And would you just introduce yourself and who you have at the table and kind of give us an overview of your presentation?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Pasquale. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development. I'm joined by Nora Spillane, the Deputy Commissioner of the department, and there's several NBD staff here as well.
Okay. And did you want to, you gave us a sheet of your overview. Did you want to just jump into that?
Sure,
Okay.
if that's okay. Can you guys hear me? So just wanted to highlight a few accomplishments over the past year. And first, thank you for having us here today, and happy to have this conversation. Starting with just sort of new programming and new grant revenue, we were able to successfully secure a $4.1 million grant for lead hazard control. It's officially open, and we have 51 applications that we're processing right now. And over 3.5 years, we'll renovate and remediate lead in 230 units, targeted in the neighborhood revitalization strategy areas, or NRSAs. That also includes a healthy home supplement. So in addition to lead hazard control, we'll be able to do some of the mold, asthma, trip and fall hazards, and other mitigation in those units. We've had a soft launch with the Financial Empowerment Center. We have an office downstairs, and we're working with home headquarters and have hired staff. It's a pretty intensive training process. In addition to training the staff that are working on the Financial Empowerment Center, we were able to train 10 other members of the community at a bunch of different organizations, and they're really excited about having those skills to better serve their clients. And we secured over $400,000 in new funding for this specific initiative. We were able to secure another $400,000 from the New York State Affordable Housing Corporation to renovate 10 formerly vacant properties. All 10 are in some phase of redevelopment, with the first few sales, hopeful 4 sales actually occur before June 30 by the end of this fiscal year, and the remainder during next year. As those applications become available, we're still waiting, or in the queue, as they say, for a new construction grant that you all thankfully approved us applying for last year, and we're still waiting to hear on that. We were able to secure a New York State Department, or DEC grant, $1.5 million to remediate the former Syracuse rigging site, and I believe that remediation will occur. When is it slated to occur?
We're working with New York State now. They're going to manage the grant program and the cleanup process, so we'll have to get into a contract, but we anticipate that beginning this year.
Great. On the business and economic development side, 17 projects closed this past year with a construction value of $146 million, creating 314 jobs and retaining 1,882. SEDCO had a really big year this year, which is the Economic Development Corporation. It does small business lending, and they were able to originate and close on $935,000 in loans to 8 small businesses. It's a large increase over the prior year. And of note, we've been trying to find these other resources available nationwide, and we closed our first Gross Syracuse Small Business Administration, or SBA, loan to a local women-owned business enterprise. The Open Counter software system, it's a zoning check, which sounds, what's the big deal? But any business that's interested in looking in the city of Syracuse, hey, I've always wanted to open a restaurant, I've always wanted to open a yoga studio, you're able to select by category, and a map will come up of where it's already allowed. And if you have a specific address in mind, it'll ask you several questions and allow you to know what approvals would be necessary in order to open your business. And it also generates what the fees would be for those various applications. So I know a presentation to the council will be forthcoming. It's really exciting. It allows people, not just locally, but from anywhere, to be thinking about Syracuse for opening their next business. We completed the South Ave Corridor Study, which has identified lots of opportunities, and provides a really solid document that for any business owner or prospective business owner to be able to present to a financial institution or an investor in order to justify in a very concrete way what businesses are sought by the community and what would be feasible. And then we just initiated a multi-corridor retail and industrial profile that should wrap up this fall, that includes parts of James Street, Geddes, North Salina, and South Salina, and East Brighton, that would also provide that evidence for business opportunities that would be successful along those corridors and attract investment. On the housing side, we piloted an eviction prevention pilot this year that was really successful. We worked with one private building, Clinton Plaza, and with the Syracuse Housing Authority we had received a one-time increase in ESG support last year, and it was really difficult to find applicants, believe it or not. That program has a one-to-one match, and we knew that those dollars were for one time only, and they were. So what we worked on was working with Catholic Charities and some of our legal service providers to provide true case management when you're really early in the eviction process, like 5 days late with your rent, instead of months and months rent. We were finding through the data collected by the Volunteer Lawyers Project that folks, once you get 6 or 9 months behind in your rent, it's really challenging to do anything but delay the inevitable. There's no $6,000 pot per family to get caught up. So much like the mortgage industry, we were trying to figure out how do you get people earlier in the process. So this program was more successful than we had hoped, and what we're trying to do now by this demonstration is to show our rental property owners that there is value to paying for this service. It actually not only is the right thing to do to keep families stable and in place, it's quite a cost savings, that you would experience. So we were able to prevent 69 evictions in Clinton Plaza, which they themselves estimated saved them $219,000. And we've reduced the Housing Authority petitions filed by 75% and saving them approximately $116,000. Hoping to expand that program to other buildings in Syracuse, and we're working with community agencies on identifying those and trying to make sure that this is self-sustaining for the places where it already happened. We launched the Higher Ground partnership with Onondaga County. Caitlin mentioned that a few minutes ago, but that's a pilot to assist folks that are panhandling or homeless downtown, in particular, and all over different points in the city for work opportunities. Our blight busting pilot that we've been working on, we completed 8 projects. We have 21 in various stages of construction. But the big win here is that there were 63 properties that we had started in the blight busting process, and by that citation and sort of the threat of blight busting, the owners actually complied. And these are all great single family homes that had just been sitting, and they've been either listed and sold and renovated, or the servicing agencies actually corrected the exterior violations. So we hope to expand that program during the rest of 2019 and the first part of 2020. Citywide housing vacancy is down, and there's a little chart on the back of your sheet. But over the last 5 years, vacancy is down quite a bit, and we think the blight busting in combination with these efforts to renovate single-family homes and get them into the hands of new owner occupants is contributing to that. Our foreclosure prevention with folks that are facing tax delinquency, we increased our foreclosure prevention rate to 94.8%. So most owner occupants that are facing tax foreclosure are actually saving their homes, and 74.6 overall. I highlighted a few. There's lots of production happened this year, but a few highlights where there were 5 newly constructed homes built during this fiscal year, and our investment in those leveraged about $2.41 for every dollar invested. We completed 9 major renovation candidates of vacant single-family homes and were sold to first-time home buyers with a mixture of federal and state grants in addition to buyer equity. We've been investing in a new lease purchase pilot with home headquarters, in which we're getting even more properties online. And there's a wonderful new market for people who are close to home ownership, but they might be 18 months to 2 years out. This gives them an opportunity to rent for during that time, and part of their rent is actually escrowed as part of their down payment for the end of that term. So we're hoping to expand that program. 18 rental units were completed, mostly in 1 and 2 family structures all over the city, including 3 units on the upstairs of 1022 West Fayette Street, which is a mixed-use project that serves as a real anchor for that corner. And that building was really close to a point where it may not have been able to be rescued. We have 2 significant rental projects underway that won't be completed by June 30, but during 2019 we expect them to be leased up and online, and that's Butternut Crossing and the downtown YMCA men's residence. I'll just cover some of the goals for the coming year. Caitlin touched upon the housing redevelopment and infill strategy. We are trying to use a lot of data and information. We have a vacant property task force that's met 3 times, that we've invited the members of the public. We've had some great I think we had 25 people come the first time, at least 30 the second, where we are trying to get information from the public on, you know, what is the best strategies for selecting these blocks or areas where we should target investment. And I promise you, no decisions will be made without further constituent engagement. We're just trying to figure out how, with the sort of scale of what we would like to see, how do we look at blocks to identify where there's investment opportunity and where there's already investment happening, where sometimes a block can be saved by that sort of one property on the block, and sometimes it is that amassing of several properties and those that are near community assets. We expect over this next fiscal year that there'll be some surge grant administration and program development work happening in our department. We're going to develop an opportunity zone action plan and ensure, you know, that Syracuse is participating in that program as much as possible. The block grant plan that you all just approved recently was the 5th of our 5-year plan. So that means all across the country, everyone is starting. Year 46 starts next year, and so that will be our 5-year consolidated plan, and determining, we're in the middle of preparing for that next 2019-2024 consolidated plan, which will set our federal funding priorities that we allocate for the next 5 years. We want to participate and ensure that the census engagement and complete count plan is implemented. As you guys know, census will start early 2020, and we want to ensure that everyone in Syracuse is counted. We're hopeful and fairly optimistic that the Attorney General Zombie Grant 2.0, Zombie Grant 1.0 is what funded the blight busting program, and provided some tablets for the Code Enforcement Department. But we're hoping through this next round that we're able to get more legal support to some of the cases that we've been struggling with bringing to court, or trying to figure out who the owner is, require a good deal of legal intervention and attention. So we're hopeful that we'll secure that grant and be able to address those properties that have been hardest to reach. We have a goal of an enhanced civic engagement around neighborhood and business corridor planning, whether it's through some of the studies on those business corridors that I mentioned earlier, with the planning effort, but also around the consolidated plan and our funding priorities. We will engage with at least 250 individuals to help us set that funding strategy and that plan. An expected production highlights is the completion of Butternut Crossing, of the YMCA we talked about. If awarded, St. Anthony's School and Convent is a retrofit project which would produce 55 senior housing units. We know we will complete the 21 Restore New York projects, round 4 and 5, and then we want to really finalize and figure out how to seize suspected brownfield properties that are tax delinquent, that we've really struggled with in the past. We think we have a mechanism to do just that, and this is the year to get it done. I just included in here a chart of where we stand with vacant residential property. A lot of our work and new resources have been to try to remediate that condition, and we're seeing really positive trends in how that's playing out and how we're stabilizing the vacant property issue here in the city. And that's my overview.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions. We'll start on this end first.
Thanks. So I've represented tenants a lot in landlord-tenant court. So I feel like I have a little bit of an understanding of what that is like, and many of those folks who are coming in are many months behind, and they're only trying to delay that inevitable. I'm wondering, and so I applaud the city for the eviction prevention pilot. I know that it's having huge impacts, and I think moving the needle on that, on evictions, has impacts on so many other things, on school. I mean, right now, 12% of kids in our schools, I think it is, are homeless on any given day. If we're cutting down on the eviction, we're cutting down on homelessness. Like, you're gonna move the needle on so many other measures of success in our city, so I applaud you for that, for those efforts, and I'm glad you're gonna continue to expand. One of the things you mentioned was about funding to maintain and to continue to expand those programs. And one thing that I wanted to see if you had done any investigation or have any information about is these kind of eviction or landlord-tenant mediation kind of programs. I know that they're happening in other communities. Kalamazoo, Michigan is one of the first ones that did this kind of thing, but they're kind of spreading all over the country. It's really innovative. Landlords save the cost of the petitions and cost of serving. They save time in terms of unpaid time and money in terms of unpaid rent. And it provides an opportunity and incentives on both sides to come to the table and try to get those rents paid, try to get those code and other issues, which might be the underlying issues in the non-payment, addressed. So, and I think that there's opportunities to make that self-sustaining, because you are saving money for the landlords, not paying those court costs, and you're saving money for the county because the county's not paying those emergency grants for first month's rent or back rent. So I would urge you to think about that as another potential avenue for funding these great eviction prevention programs that you're doing.
No, thank you for that. That's a great example, and certainly sounds like it can really enhance the efforts that we've put in place, for sure.
Okay. That's it. Councilor Driscoll.
Yeah, I was just curious. We've talked about this a couple of times in the past, but if you could just give us broad strokes. I feel like I've heard a couple of different explanations about how the $4.1 million for the lead grant will be spent. Could you tell us a little bit about how you imagine it going out, and particularly, just like big ticket, where, and it'll go to, fighting the problem, but in what specific ways could you explain?
Sure. So the program, there's a couple of ways that we market the program, and I don't know if that's getting at the heart of your question. We work obviously with the Onondaga County Health Department, and their first line of defense, if they get a referral, or if they're working on a case where there's a lead poisoned child identified, that those go to the top of the list, and we make sure that we work with those landlords as soon as possible to address those properties. So that's the number one priority and the number one, sort of referral. We are partnering with Onondaga County Community Development as well, so that as their grant funds run out, ours kick in, so that we ensure that they've provided a ton of referrals as well.
So are they not applying again?
Of course they are. They're just, when their grant ends and when the new one starts, there's a gap in the middle.
There's a gap in between. Mm-hmm. When would their new one start? Should they get it?
It hasn't been released yet, to my knowledge.
Oh,
I don't think the federal government has released the new application, to my knowledge.
Okay.
So
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
And we're also in the Division of Code Enforcement, we've been placing inserts for anybody who has a code violation. We mailed out advertisement to all landlords of 1 and 2 family properties in the city of Syracuse that this program was available. So we're trying to make sure that at touch points, if you come into the City Hall Commons and you have a code violation issue, that the clerks and the folks in code enforcement are also telling people about this program, but also that we're doing the best that we can through outreach and working with TNT and some others on making sure people are aware of this program, that it's open, and that to get through. It isn't an easy program to apply for. You have to get a lot of information from tenants, and you have to get a lot of information from the landlord, but we're committed to deploying these funds in the neighborhoods that need it the most.
And how much is that, one is there any distinction between owner occupied and, you know, landlord tenant situation, and how the money is distributed, and what is the average spend per home kind of thing? And is the bulk of it, how many of the projects are like full abatement and how many are just like remediation efforts?
So typically, we're spending less than $25,000 per unit. Above 25 and above would trigger abatement, which is removal of components, and then the project gets quite costly.
Costly, yeah.
So we're expecting an average about 20,000 per property, and the grant funds will cover about 14,000 per property or per unit, and that's where we've been working with lots of different sources to make sure we have the resources to cover the small gap.
So if it's, say it's 14,000 per unit, if that's together, does it go by unit or by property?
It averages by unit, but so if you have a
So
two-family.
if you hit the 20, I'm wondering if you hit the
by unit,
25,000
the
cap.
25,000, excuse me, is by unit.
So you wouldn't trigger
So it's
full abatement if
50,000.
it's a one property. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how many full abatements do you think will go in this grant? Is that just basically we're trying to avoid that? Is that?
It's not we're trying to avoid it, it just becomes more, we would do a far less number of units.
Right,
So
right.
we're following HUD guidelines and using interim controls to remediate as best as possible. And in friction components, we typically replace, so when windows, you won't have to
Windows,
go back,
doors.
right? But porch floors and that sort of thing, we try to remediate that and make sure that, and there's a huge education component that goes along with this, both with the tenants and the landlords, to make sure that they're, addressing these going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Counselor Thompson?
I'm all set, thank you.
President Hudson?
Yeah, I want to broach this issue again, and maybe I can get a clear answer, and thank you for what you do. I was approached, NBD, Neighborhood Business Development. I was approached by a few homeowners on the south side, and they have a concern about their property values because in the vacant lot next to them, they've now added 3 tiny homes. So I'm trying to figure out
Sorry, Counselor Hudson, they've added what?
3 tiny homes. And this block of Matson has been residential forever. They've been paying their taxes for 30+ years, but it didn't warrant them getting a notice that this was going to happen in their community. I'm just trying to figure out how do we do this? How does that happen?
So you mean they weren't notified that those properties were being built? I'll certainly look into that. My understanding, and we're not involved in funding those projects, so we often don't know they're happening, is that the organization is committed to community engagement, and I'd be certainly happy to follow up with their executive director and get back to you on that.
And knowing that this part of the city has the lowest property value, what does this do to the property value on that block?
Yeah, I can't answer about assessment, but it's certainly a valid concern, and happy to talk to Commissioner Clifford about that and get his opinion on what the impact would be.
Okay, because they're not happy about that. And then the second piece I have is St. Anthony's. So if it is awarded for the retrofit for the senior housing, does the lights go back on Carvin and Midland?
Oh, the traffic light? I don't know the answer to that, but
We could definitely check with DPW.
Okay.
Probably Neil.
That's all I have.
Yep, go ahead.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
First, I want to second Councilor Lovejoy Grinnell's point about and the benefit of the eviction prevention. Obviously, through some of the foreclosures, one of my greatest concerns were people who live on fixed incomes and who may not have purposefully or by their own neglect fallen behind, but just because of change of costs and that kind of thing. I want to reference some things, though, in your overview, just for clarity. I think there's a lot to applaud, but just some questions for clarity. Now, let me prelude this by saying the point of this first question is just for transparency, right? And this is not a suggestion that, or this is not implying or maybe targeting you for transparency, but you can help us provide transparency, not only for what's here, but even for some things that's reported in the media, if that makes sense. Business economic development, side of project, 17 projects closed with construction value 146 million, created 314 jobs for people who live where?
Sure. We, SIDA does not at this time track employment. Frankly, it's partly a capacity issue and partly it's an information security issue. We continue to work not only with the mayor's team on developing the Syracuse Build program, but looking at ways that we can get residency information in a way that is both transparent, but is also protects the identity of those folks who are working on those job sites. So how do we get certified payroll, but also how do we keep that information secure is a concern. It's not an easy answer, but it is certainly something that we are constantly trying to figure out. I would note just the subcontractors on those sites are required to complete paperwork in order to be eligible for any tax abatements that are awarded to the project. In that process, we double check quite rigorously, if you ask some of our projects, the location of the business. The majority of businesses that are receiving that ST60 form in order to participate on those projects are located within Onondaga County. The logical conclusion, and that's a SBA kind of metric, is that local businesses hire locally. Your point is well taken about city residents, and it's something we continue to advocate for.
Right, and so I asked that question for two reasons. One, obviously for clarity, but also so people won't be disillusioned, and it's not on your part, so I wanted to make that clear from the beginning. But currently, there was a report in the paper the other day about the Syracuse area and the reduction in unemployment to 4.4%.
Right.
And I won't call it I won't necessarily call it small print. They defined the Syracuse area after that to include Madison County, Oswego County, so on and so forth. So I want to make clear that there was no reduction in unemployment in the city. I just checked the stats. We're still at 6.6% overall and 9.3% for persons 25 and older, who are actually the people who pay bills.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we're clear, and I know, Nora, that you guys don't track location of employment, but I wanted to make that clear so nobody's disillusioned that those jobs are not happening here. As a further point to clarify, if 314 people were hired in the city, as a layman would look at that and assume that's what we're referencing here, then you're talking about actually over a 3% reduction in unemployment, because there's 9,521 unemployed able-bodied people in the city of Syracuse. And that's how far that's how much of a drop that would be. That would put us, if 314 were employed here, it would put us at under 3.6% unemployment, which we are not.
Sure, and those are new jobs created, just to be clear about that metric. Those are new jobs created that is over 5 years that we are the minimum monitoring period that we are required to monitor. But that's anticipated over 5 years, and certainly we do work closely with projects to have that conversation about who you're hiring, what the skill sets you're looking for are, how do we connect you with other resources and training programs so that there are opportunities for city residents.
I mean, and I'm not putting the blame on you, but I just want to note the timing of when SIDA stopped coming to the council, which was right after we passed the local hiring ordinance. I want to make that point clear.
I would, there are two things that I would just say. One, there was a change in the state regulations that we had to respond to. So while I think you're making a correlation, I think it's not a... Actually,
that's not true. See, the fact is, the SIDA never had to come to the council. It was a gentleman's agreement between the city, between the administration and SIDA. So I want to make that clear. They never were obligated to come to the council for approval. It was just better optics, just to be quite frank, and it kept the taxpayers involved. When we passed the local hiring ordinance, they backed out. I want to make that clear. There's really no rebuttal for that, and I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I'm just stating what's true.
I just want to make sure that it's clear that there is no correlation between those two events that you're insinuating, frankly. And furthermore, SIDA is a public body that meets every month, is broadcast live,
Yeah.
and there is as much, if not, SIDA is held to the same open meeting standard as this body.
I hear you, but that has nothing to do with what I said. My second question, relative to Burnett Crossing, is this a new part of that development? Because we approved that a long time ago. Why is it taking so long?
You did approve it quite a while ago. It's a, I think, 17 scattered sites project, and it's been under construction. And I think 2/3 of it is pretty much complete, and 1/3 of it is still sort of underway. But it was a complicated. Some of the topography, they've just had a few issues with construction, but I think it's on course to lease up by October.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. On the BOAs, are we still discovering new BOA sites, or are we still, we have, I guess it's tough to have an accurate count on brownfields.
So we maintain a list of what we consider our suspected brownfields because of their prior use and their classification. And those ones, and I know there's ones in probably every one, you probably all have your own list. You're like, oh, why don't we redevelop this old gas station or whatnot? And so those are, they're often on, primary business corridors or primary traveled corridors. So finding a mechanism to do so that protects, that the city feels comfortable, you all feel comfortable with, has been a slow but heavy lift. And so, I believe that we haven't researched every single property, but I think, was it last summer, we had someone, we had a law intern who took our list and sort of dug in and was able to say, you know what, these ones probably are clean. And it did reduce the list a little bit, but we still are maintaining that list, and I'd be happy to share it with folks.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
My last question, in the budget, notice the going into year 20, the 415 line jumps 187,000, a little over. Can you explain why?
Yeah, no, I thought you might ask that question. I don't know, I will note a couple of items. One is TNT, the $80,000 that's been traditionally allocated to TNT has been moved into the MBD budget. The census coordinator position was moved, and it's new to MBD budget, but we do, that position, you won't see it in the next budget. And we did ask for a business development director position in this budget to better manage the expected activity through Syracuse Surge and some of these other grants and things we've been trying to secure and administer, and just do a better job with the day-to-day of business development and with the subsidiary corporations. I felt very strongly that we needed that layer of support. So there are those two new positions plus TNT reflected in your budget.
All right. You jarred memory of a question, but it seemed like Councilor Allen was going to ask that question.
And Councilor Green, so you can ask it.
So I know I'll ad-lib when you start. That's all I got.
Okay, so we might as well jump into the TNT. So you have, on here is listed as 80,000. So maybe Jimmy can speak to some of it. I'll let you ask yours and then so mine is specifically for the TNT South Side. So there was money allocated for a particular project, and the project is not complete yet, the bridge. So where's the rest of the money, we want to know?
Can I add to that?
And yep.
And the fact that it was supposed to be 2 bridges done, and one is not even complete, and we have no idea
Yeah.
what she said.
It's the bridge on what is it, Taylor?
Call it. You got Taylor and Salina, and then
Yep.
Colvin.
So Taylor and Salina Street, that one isn't complete. I guess the design that was supposed to happen isn't there. It's just painted orange now. And then the other one isn't done at all. So there's just some confusion because the money was allocated for that, but it hasn't happened yet. So I don't know who wants to answer.
That funding for those projects is not.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, forget about the streaming thing. So the $80,000 that TNT gets, that money for those projects is not part of that $80,000. That came in through, you guys can probably answer where the funds came from better.
Okay.
Yeah, one sec.
that came in from somewhere else, and home headquarters was administering those grant funds for those bridges. So TNT proper didn't have anything to do with the actual money stream.
For that.
So TNT Southside at that time kind of went off on their own and applied for a grant without TNT. At the time, TNT was very scattered. TNT was very scattered around. So we're now much more structured. The board is together. We're talking to each other, so we know when grants are being applied for. At the time that Southside TNT applied for those 2 bridge grants, the board of directors had no idea that they did so.
Okay.
So typically TNT funds go through home headquarters. They let us borrow money while we're waiting for the city to fund TNT. However, thanks to this move over to NBD this year, we're actually getting our money faster because our books look better, and we are actually talking with home headquarters in a way that we weren't before with the previous city administration.
And so presently you guys they have to come through you to even apply for a grant, and you guys are going to monitor the grants to make sure that the money is spent where it was applied for?
So in the past, TNT, because of the scatter, there's 8 different sectors. They were operating as 8 different bodies. So someone in Eastwood may have been applying for a grant with TNT's 501c3 status, and the board would never know anything about it. Same thing with the South Side. They'd be applying for grants, we'd have no idea. So what myself and a couple of other board directors have had to do is really kind of put our foot down and say we are one organization operating as one body to apply for these grants. We cannot be applying for them in 8 different sectors with 8 different people trying to administer them.
Right.
So to your question, I have no idea about those bridge projects, where we are in that process, because theoretically it wasn't even a TNT project. It was someone inside the TNT sector went out, applied for the grant, and then kind of got dropped on us. And I think you might be, do you know, Stephanie, where that money?
I do.
I figured you would.
Stephanie has.
So we reimburse for work performed. So home headquarters is the fiscal agent for that grant, and we only reimburse for work performed, and we do inspect prior to payment. So I'd be happy to check on the balance of that and see if any payments have gone out. But they did have, that last on-cycle award was a 2-year period. So there was a 2-year allocation to get that work done.
So
but I'm happy to, excuse me?
So they're gonna have time to finish the project?
Correct.
Okay. If there's plans for.
Well, I will get you a
Yeah, no,
formal
I
update.
believe you, but from what I understood from the community people involved, they stopped doing
They
the
just
project.
stopped.
Which is what raised
Right,
questions
right.
in my mind.
No, I appreciate that.
Stopping you
And I'm
and
glad we
finish
paid
the
for
job
work
we got paid
performed.
for. So
No, I'm happy,
good, I appreciate it.
yeah, I'll report back, and I appreciate the information. Thank you.
And I'll try to find out on our end if we can get any more information. If I can expand a little bit on it, that with that $80,000 that we get from the city, where that goes, I guess is important to probably state. So it's an even split. 40,000 of it goes to the 8 sectors, 5,000 apiece for projects that are decided in the sectors. The other $40,000 goes to administration, which pays one part-time employee who works about 50 hours a week. Gets paid for about 20. And then administration of everything else that we do citywide. The goal over the last 2 years has been to capitalize on the money that we get from the city and try to reach out to other places to find money for other grants. So this year we were successful. We've gotten $45,000 from the Community Foundation for a lead and a census grant, and we're working on getting more. Community Foundation just gave us another couple $1,000s to start putting snacks and food in the TNT meetings, which actually works. People do come if you promise pizza. But so that's where we are with that $80,000. I wish it was more, but we're thrilled that we still have the 80.
So my question is more broadly, having the money now be in NBD's budget. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between NBD and TNT and how that communication goes and is administered?
Sure. So from sort of a collaborative standpoint, we meet often with TNT board members and staff, and there's lots of cross-pollination, particularly as Jimmy mentioned around census and lead and making sure that we have that vehicle to at least get the word on the street for things that we have available. NBD staff, we try to have a staff person at every single TNT meeting. We have a schedule that we're constantly to make sure we know what's going on in the community and using that information. But regarding TNT being a separate entity, we don't have influence over the decisions around the projects, but we're obviously make sure that they're projects that are eligible and that fit within the specific scope of work that was identified in their contract. So we manage those funds, if you will. So when the vouchers come in, we make sure that all of the things were expended according to the budget that was provided to us, and using the projects and the types of projects that were outlined in their contract.
And then I guess from TNT's perspective, is there any sense of work that the city could be doing that would help facilitate, greater engagement within TNT, or anything else the city could be doing to help with that?
Well, moving us over to NBD has been a tremendous help to us, because everything is faster, because I'm just really going to compliment you guys, but they're more organized and we're communicating with each other much more than TNT was. I can't speak to TNT 20 years ago, but I can tell you from the last few years that I've been around it, things were extremely disorganized. Communication was very poor, and that has gotten tremendously better since we've been working with NBD. The financial piece of it has gotten, we were in a situation where we were borrowing money from home headquarters to pay our payroll because we were waiting for money to come in from the city. That's just absurd to me, right? No other nonprofit in the city has to do that, has to work like that. We're not doing that anymore. We have the money fast because we're working together, we're getting the paperwork done, we're talking to each other. So that alone is a big difference. TNT, I think, has, over the last maybe 5 years, just become 8 rooms in 8 places in the city where people are going to complain about things that they've always complained about. We're trying to fix that. We're making strides. So thanks to NBD and for the city for moving it. But.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yep.
I know one of the things you talked about a little bit last year is city-owned property that might be underutilized, and trying to put that into more productive use, whether it be for businesses or residents, and then the benefit obviously being that they go on the tax rolls, which we desperately need. So can you just give a little bit of update on that?
Sure, and I just want to highlight, I appreciate, and Councilor Bay in particular has been really helpful in helping us think how to do this better. So we tried doing it ourselves, and we have a process, and I think the RFP, we RFP the Paulson site, which I think you're familiar with, and worked with the National Development Council in developing that, and like, oh, this seems so great, let's put this out, and tons of people are going to apply, and we had a great listserv that we put together and sent it out just en masse. And, we only received one response from that particular RFP, so we know something's not working. And I think part of it is, commercial real estate is complicated, and we don't have a commercial real estate department. We tried to sort of take this on ourselves and use our in-house expertise as much as we could. And I think going forward, we might want to consider engaging the services of a commercial broker and put more property kind of out there. So I think we need to evaluate that as an option, as well as look at the criteria that we had put together and see if was it too onerous, as people say, forget it, this is too hard. So I think what we're committed to do is to talk to at least a couple developers, say, hey, why didn't you apply? You downloaded that application, why didn't you apply? And figure out ways in which we can make that process quicker and stronger.
Yeah, because I guess, and I know you know this too, but the opportunity cost of holding these properties for another year, I mean, if you were to add up the taxes we'd get from it, would more than pay for whatever an additional person would be, or, so it's just something I know you're working on and encouraged to continue.
So is that more people for me? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, if that's